When my daughter graduated, I invited every aunt, uncle and cousin. Only one showed up. 2 months later, when my nephew had his party, I was told, it's just for close family. So I drove by with a gift and a camera. What I posted that night spread through the family faster than any invitation ever did. My daughter's graduation had been a long time coming. 4 years of relentless effort, sleepless nights, and relentless dedication to schoolwork had finally culminated in this single moment of triumph. I had always believed that milestones like these deserved to be celebrated properly, surrounded by the people who mattered, family, friends, mentors, anyone who had contributed to her growth, even indirectly. And so, with excitement and anticipation, I began planning the graduation party. Invitations were sent weeks in advance to every aunt, uncle, and cousin I could think of. Every single one of them received a personal message, some with handwritten notes included, expressing how important it was to me that they celebrate this milestone with us. I spent days preparing. The house was cleaned from top to bottom. Decorations were hung meticulously, and the food was planned to perfection. I wanted everything to reflect the pride and joy I felt, not just in my daughter's achievements, but in our family's connection. I even created a special photo corner with props, a backdrop, and a Polaroid camera, so that everyone could take pictures together, capturing memories that would last a lifetime. I envisioned laughter, conversations, hugs, and stories being shared late into the evening. This was more than a party. It was a declaration of love and family unity. The day of the graduation arrived, and I could barely contain my excitement. My daughter was radiant, her gown perfectly pressed, her smile wide and confident. I watched her greet friends from school, teachers, and neighbors with pride swelling in my chest. Then came the moment I had been anticipating the most, the arrival of family. My heart raced as I peered out the window, expecting to see familiar cars pulling into the driveway. Minutes ticked by, then hours, and one by one, I realized something painfully obvious. The driveway remained nearly empty. Only Aunt Linda had shown up. Just her. My stomach sank. I tried to mask my disappointment for my daughter's sake, but it was impossible to ignore. Aunt Linda had always been warm and caring, but she alone could not fill the emotional void left by the absence of everyone else. I handed my daughter her gift and tried to engage her in conversation, pointing out that at least some family had made it. She smiled, ever resilient, but I saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes, the same hurt I was feeling. I couldn't help but think about the messages I had sent, the calls I had made, the excitement I had shared with each relative weeks ago. Every single one of them had declined or ignored the invitation. No excuses, just silence. That night, after the last guest, Aunt Linda, had left, I sat in the quiet house, my daughter asleep in her room, her graduation gown still hanging in the corner. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How could people who called themselves family, people who lived only a few miles away, ignore something so significant? I scrolled through my phone, rereading the responses, mostly polite declines, some vague apologies, but nothing that reflected genuine acknowledgement or effort. The emotional weight of their absence pressed on me, a suffocating reminder that family bonds often exist only when convenient. But I didn't dwell on the bitterness for long. Deep down, I knew I had done everything I could to celebrate my daughter's achievement properly. She had been seen, she had been celebrated by those who mattered most, her friends, her teachers, and the aunt who had shown up. Yet, I also realized something else: the absence of the others was not just a reflection of their priorities, but of the complacency that often creeps into family dynamics. People assume they can take milestones for granted, assuming they will always be acknowledged in other ways, or that someone else will make the effort. I refused to let this slide. 2 months later, the family had another opportunity to gather my nephew's birthday party. This time, I didn't even expect anyone to attend. I received a message from my sister-in-law that read casually, "It's just for close family." The words felt like salt in a wound. Once again, a clear demarcation of who mattered and who didn't in the eyes of this family. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a mix of indignation and determination. I knew I couldn't let this go unnoticed. I wasn't just going to accept this exclusion quietly. My daughter's hurt from her graduation still lingered in my mind, and now, I had the chance to expose the same pattern in a way that could no longer be ignored. I decided to do something that felt daring, perhaps even audacious. I would drive by the party, with a gift in hand, and I would bring a camera. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone for the sake of drama. I simply wanted to make the absence of true acknowledgement visible, to capture the reality of who showed up, who cared, and who had repeatedly chosen convenience over connection. I spent days planning, making sure the gift was appropriate, beautifully wrapped, and that the camera setup would discreetly capture interactions without intruding. I wanted authenticity, honesty, and undeniable evidence of what had transpired. When the day came, I loaded the car with the gift and camera equipment, my heart a strange mixture of apprehension and resolve. I rehearsed how I would enter, what I would say, and how I would capture everything. I drove carefully, taking mental notes of every detail, imagining the faces I might encounter, the subtle shifts in conversation when my presence was acknowledged or ignored. I was prepared for confrontation, for awkwardness, and for the reality that family relationships often reveal themselves in their most unvarnished form during moments like this. And yet, beneath all the planning, I also held a small spark of hope that my actions, my documentation, and the eventual revelation could create a reckoning, a truth that could no longer be denied. When I arrived at my nephew's house that afternoon, I parked a short distance away, just far enough that I could observe without immediately drawing attention. The yard was decorated modestly, with colorful balloons and a small inflatable castle in one corner. Laughter floated through the air, mostly from the children running around and the adults gathered near the patio, chatting casually. I could see my nephew, oblivious to the family politics swirling just beyond his awareness, excitedly tearing through gift wrap with the kind of joy only a 6-year-old can muster. My stomach churned with a mixture of anger and determination. The message that this gathering was just for close family echoed in my mind, a reminder of the pattern I was determined to expose. I carefully retrieved the camera from the trunk, a small, discreet device that could capture wide angles without drawing attention. I wanted it to record everything: the arrivals, the interactions, the glances, the subtle dynamics that often reveal far more than words ever could. In my bag, I also carried a gift for my nephew, wrapped in cheerful paper with bright ribbons. It wasn't an extravagant gift, but it was thoughtful, something I had chosen to reflect his interests and personality. My plan wasn't about the gift itself. It was about making a statement, ensuring that presence, effort, and care could not be ignored or dismissed. As I approached the gate, I could see my sister-in-law glance up, her expression immediately wary. "Nick," she said, forcing a polite smile. You're here." I nodded, carrying the gift and keeping the camera discreetly tucked under my arm. "I wanted to bring a present," I said evenly, not explaining the camera yet. "Happy birthday, buddy," I added, handing the gift to my nephew. His face lit up, and I could feel a small surge of relief. At least one person would benefit from my presence, and that, I realized, was enough to justify part of my actions. The adults, however, were less welcoming. Whispers and sidelong glances followed me as I made my way into the yard. I could sense the tension, the discomfort at my presence, and the subtle judgments being passed. It was fascinating to observe the way people adjust their posture, lower their voices, or change topics when confronted with someone they had previously dismissed or overlooked. I set up the camera on a small tripod in a corner of the patio, angled to capture the majority of interactions while remaining unobtrusive. Then, with a deep breath, I let myself become part of the gathering, chatting politely, laughing when appropriate, and giving my nephew attention. All the while, the camera recorded everything, silent testimony to the dynamics I had been excluded from. As the party progressed, I noticed the subtleties of exclusion. Certain aunts and uncles barely glanced in my direction, avoiding eye contact entirely. Conversations that had once been inclusive now seemed carefully curated to leave me out. My presence was tolerated, but not welcomed, and the contrast between my genuine involvement and their carefully managed distance was stark. I could see how exclusion operates subtly, not with dramatic confrontation but with a series of small gestures and omissions that accumulate into an undeniable pattern. Every laugh, every conversation, every casual glance the camera captured told the story my nephew couldn't articulate, but which I could now document. After a while, I found a quiet moment to speak with my nephew alone. "Did you know I'd be here?" I asked softly, kneeling to his level. He shook his head, still clutching a half-unwrapped gift. "I'm glad you came," he said simply, his voice innocent and sincere. I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Me too, buddy. Me too." It was a small, human connection that reminded me why I had undertaken this exercise. It wasn't about shaming anyone, it was about preserving acknowledgement, ensuring that someone who deserved attention and celebration actually received it. By mid-afternoon, I began to sense the stirrings of unease among the adults. A few whispered to each other, casting furtive glances in my direction. My presence, combined with the camera tucked discreetly in the corner, was making a statement they couldn't ignore. I didn't confront anyone directly, I didn't have to. The subtle tension spoke volumes. Every gesture, every expression captured on the camera would later illustrate the reality of the gathering far more effectively than words could. I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that I had created a record of both presence and absence, effort and indifference. As the party began winding down, I prepared to leave. I retrieved the camera and packed it carefully into my bag, ensuring that I had captured every meaningful moment. I said goodbye to my nephew, hugged him tightly, and reminded him how proud I was of him, not just for the birthday, but for the person he was becoming. Walking back to my car, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Relief that the gift had been delivered and the interactions recorded, and anticipation for what would happen when the footage was shared. I knew it would spark reactions, conversations, confrontations, perhaps even arguments, but it would also ensure that my message was clear. Effort, presence, and acknowledgement could not be ignored. That evening, I uploaded selected clips and photos from the party, carefully curated to illustrate the dynamics I had observed. I added captions that highlighted moments of exclusion and subtle indifference, juxtaposed with the genuine joy of my nephew and the sincere gestures I had made. It was not cruel or malicious, it was honest, unvarnished documentation of a reality that had long been dismissed. Within hours, the post began circulating through family networks faster than any traditional invitation or message ever could. Notifications pinged continuously, messages poured in, and I could see the effect. People were talking, sharing, and confronting the very dynamics that had previously been ignored or tolerated. The reaction started almost immediately. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts, missed calls, and private messages from every corner of the family poured in, some supportive, some defensive, and others outright confrontational. I had expected a stir, but I hadn't anticipated just how intense it would be. My sister-in-law was the first to reach out directly, her voice trembling over the phone. "Nick, I saw what you posted," she said, her words rushed and hesitant. I don't even know what to say. I thought it was just a small family party. I didn't realize it would make anyone feel excluded." I stayed calm, letting her fumble for words. "It's not about the party itself," I said evenly. "It's about acknowledging the people who make an effort, the ones who show up, the ones who care. You chose to exclude me, and the camera just made visible what's always been happening, the pattern of who matters and who doesn't." My voice carried no malice, only clarity. I could hear her exhale slowly, the realization sinking in. There was no easy escape, the record was undeniable, and she knew it. Then the messages from other family members began to arrive. Some were outright defensive, accusing me of being dramatic or seeking attention. "Why would you post this online? It's embarrassing for everyone," one cousin wrote. Another uncle commented with fox casualness. "We didn't mean anything by it. It was just a private family gathering." But the truth, captured in video and images, told a story that could not be denied. In the clips, you could see the adults interacting politely with each other while intentionally ignoring me. In the photos, my nephew's joy contrasted sharply with the deliberate distance of some relatives. It was undeniable exclusion had occurred, and now it was visible for all to see. By mid-afternoon, my parents had seen the post. I knew they would be upset, but the combination of guilt, embarrassment, and clarity made the situation inevitable. My mother called, voice shaky. "Nick, I don't know what to say. I didn't realize how it felt to be excluded like that. I feel terrible. I never wanted you to feel invisible." Her confession, though heartfelt, carried the weight of years of patterns that had never been challenged until now. My father's message was shorter, terse, and a little defensive. "We'll talk. This could have been handled differently," he wrote, but I could sense his discomfort. The post had forced recognition, and recognition cannot be easily brushed aside. The next few hours were a whirlwind. I responded to supportive messages, thanked relatives who understood the point I was making, and ignored those whose goal was to incite conflict. The beauty of the post was that it didn't need me to argue, the evidence spoke for itself. Clips of my nephew laughing, opening gifts, and interacting with me were juxtaposed with subtle glances of adults avoiding eye contact, sidestepping conversations, and excluding me from interactions. The contrast was clear, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. That evening, I received a call from my cousin Jenna, who had always been perceptive. "Nick, this is wow," she said. "I can't believe how blatantly some people ignored you. I'm glad you captured it. Maybe now they'll actually see what they've been doing all these years." Her words gave me a strange sense of validation. I hadn't done this for revenge. I had done it to create visibility, to highlight the reality of emotional neglect that had been tolerated far too long. Yet, even as I appreciated her support, I knew that not everyone would respond positively. Some would resist, some would rationalize, and some would even try to rewrite history. The real confrontation came the following day. My sister-in-law, visibly shaken, came over to my house. She didn't bring my nephew this time. She came to speak with me directly. "Nick, I've been thinking all night," she began. "You're right. I didn't consider how it would feel to be excluded. I thought it was just a casual party, but now I see you went out of your way to make sure your presence and effort were acknowledged. I'm sorry." "Truly," I nodded, letting her words sink in. "It's not about blame," I said. "It's about awareness. We all need to recognize effort, love, and care when it happens. Exclusion, even subtle, leaves marks." My nephew's joy was real, and I wanted that to be seen. Everyone else's behavior, that needed to be visible too. By late afternoon, the post had reached almost every corner of the family network. Comments flooded in, some apologetic, some defensive, and some still incredulous. People who had previously ignored invitations were now acknowledging their behavior, some privately, others publicly. The post had forced a reckoning, one that would have been impossible to achieve with polite emails or phone calls. Families often avoid uncomfortable truths, but when documentation exists, avoidance becomes much harder. The impact was undeniable. The conversation had shifted, boundaries had been clarified, and accountability had begun to take root. That evening, I reflected on the events, the reactions, and the subtle transformation that had already begun. I realized that the power of visibility was profound. What we ignore in private can become undeniable when illuminated. My nephew's happiness remained the central focus, untouched by the family drama, and yet, the adults around him had been forced to confront their behavior, to see what had been invisible for far too long. It wasn't about shaming, it was about making reality unavoidable. The post had done exactly that. The following morning, the aftermath of my post had fully set in. The family group chats were alive with activity, messages pinned constantly, some apologetic, others defensive, and a few attempting to downplay the situation entirely. I ignored the less constructive conversations, focusing instead on those that seemed genuine. It was clear that my actions had created a ripple effect far larger than I had anticipated. People were talking, not just among themselves, but to me directly. For the first time, the truth about who valued effort and who consistently ignored it was out in the open, visible to everyone. My sister-in-law was the first to come over in person. She arrived timidly, carrying a tray of cookies as if it were some kind of peace offering. Her expression was a mixture of guilt and relief. "Nick," she began, "I came to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize how hurtful it felt to be excluded from the party. Seeing the camera footage, it's hard to argue with that. I get it now, I really do." I listened quietly, letting her words settle in. It wasn't about acknowledgement alone, it was about accountability. She had seen the evidence, and that made a difference in a way that words alone never could. Next, my parents called. Their voices were tense but tempered with awareness. My mother said first, "We saw the post and we were shocked. Not at the party itself, but at how things were handled, how some people acted. I think we've been complacent, assuming family obligations didn't need attention. I see now that we were wrong. I'm sorry." My father added, more quietly, "We need to do better." This was a wake-up call, even if it came in a way we weren't expecting. The sincerity in their voices was palpable. Even though the confrontation was difficult, it had forced them to confront uncomfortable truths that had been festering for years. The most surprising development came from my nephew's father, my brother. At first, he was defensive, claiming the party was meant to be small and intimate, as though those words justified years of unexamined exclusion. But as he reviewed the photos and clips I had posted, I could see the tension in his face. There was no escaping the truth. The camera had captured a reality that could not be ignored. Eventually, he admitted quietly, "I didn't realize how our actions, our inactions, looked. It's embarrassing, honestly. I can see now how this must have felt to you and to everyone left out." That admission, though reluctant, was significant. The visibility I had created had forced recognition, and recognition, unlike casual conversation, cannot be ignored or rationalized away. Over the next few days, the family slowly began to process the impact. Conversations became more honest, apologies were offered, not just to me, but to others who had observed or been affected by the behavior. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years reached out privately, acknowledging their own awareness of patterns they had previously overlooked. The post had functioned as a mirror, reflecting not only my experiences but the collective behavior of the family. People were no longer able to pretend that effort and care went unnoticed. because the evidence was right there, plain as day. It wasn't all comfortable. Some relatives were still defensive, claiming that I had humiliated the family or overreacted. But even in their complaints, the acknowledgement of effort was unavoidable. The contrast between genuine involvement, my presence at the party, my attention to my nephew, and the care I had put into the gift, and the subtle indifference of others was impossible to deny. It had been documented, witnessed, and now shared in a way that demanded accountability. For the first time, the family had a tangible illustration of what inclusion, or exclusion, looked like in practice. Weeks later, I noticed a subtle shift in dynamics. Family gatherings became more intentional, invitations were extended thoughtfully, and effort was acknowledged openly. My actions had not only called attention to past oversights, but they had also created a precedent for the future. The lesson was clear: presence, effort, and care are not abstract concepts, they are tangible, observable, and deserving of acknowledgement. Those who once assumed they could ignore such efforts had learned, the hard way, that invisibility is no longer an option. I also observed a remarkable change in my nephew. He seemed more aware, more attentive, and more appreciative of gestures, whether they came from me or other family members. The small joy in his eyes during the party, the genuine delight at my presence, was a testament to the importance of recognition. It reinforced why I had taken the risk of documenting the gathering. It wasn't about punishment, it was about teaching the value of thoughtfulness and ensuring that kindness and effort were visible and celebrated. In reflecting on the entire experience, I realized how powerful visibility can be. Sometimes, family neglect isn't malicious, it's habitual, unconscious, or simply the result of assumption. But when those patterns are exposed, carefully documented, and shared, they demand reckoning. My post, my gift, and my presence at the party had done precisely that. They had made invisible behavior unavoidable, compelled accountability, and fostered recognition that might never have occurred otherwise. The night after the post went live, I sat quietly in my living room, scrolling through the flood of comments and messages, feeling a complex mix of vindication and relief. I hadn't sought drama for its own sake. I hadn't wanted conflict. I had simply wanted acknowledgement for the effort, care, and love that often go unnoticed. That night, I realized that my actions had done more than expose patterns. They had reshaped relationships, clarified expectations, and created a family environment where effort and presence could no longer be ignored. Looking back, I understood that the lesson extended beyond my own family. Recognition is not passive, it requires attention, awareness, and intentionality. The invisible labor we perform for others, small gestures, thoughtful gifts, simple presence, deserves acknowledgement. And sometimes, when subtle cues are ignored, when words fail, visibility is the only way to ensure that love, effort, and care are seen. My post had done that. It had made a statement, and more importantly, it had fostered change that would last far beyond a single birthday party.